My best friend got my wife pregnant. When 12 of our closest friends sat me down at a dinner table and told me to be the bigger person. I said nothing, drove home, and spent the next 6 hours doing what I do best. I'm a forensic accountant. I find fraud for a living, money trails disguised as consulting fees, transactions buried 3 layers deep in subsidiary accounts, lies dressed up as clean paperwork. I've traced embezzlement through 4 states and rebuilt financial histories that other people, I thought were permanently erased. I find hidden things. I'm very good at it, which is why it still surprises me on some level that I was the last person to see what was happening inside my own house. Charlotte and I met at a rooftop party in Denver. Late 20s, mutual friend's birthday, and she laughed at something I said about municipal tax code. Genuinely laughed, not the polite version, and I thought, okay, this is someone worth knowing. 3 years dating, married in her parents' backyard in Colorado Springs with 40 people and a borrowed arch covered in white flowers. My best friend Max gave the toast. 12 years of friendship by that point, since grad school, both of us miserable in accounting and surviving on bad coffee and spite. He moved to Denver the same year I did. Financial analyst, showed up for everything, every move, every hospital visit, every low moment and high one. He was the best man at my wedding and the godfather to my son Henry, who came along 3 years later. Henry is 5. He has his mother's dark eyes and my inability to leave a Lego set half assembled. He calls our dog Hazel, Biscuit, because he decided that was better, and Hazel has accepted this. He lines up his train cars smallest to biggest every night before bed, and cannot sleep unless the order is exactly right. I'm telling you this because when everything fell apart, Henry's trains were still lined up perfectly every morning. That was the thing I held on to. Charlotte changed in January, quieter, distracted in a way that read as stress, which she explained away as a difficult project at work. She started going to a weekly thing at Max's apartment. He'd just gone through a rough breakup and needed the company, she said. I didn't question it. Max was my best friend. Charlotte was my wife. Those were the 2 people in the world I trusted completely. I found out in March. I handle our household finances. Not because Charlotte can't. She manages projects for a living, she's more than capable, but because I find it satisfying, the same way other people find crossword puzzles satisfying. One Sunday afternoon I was reconciling February statements while Henry napped, and I found a charge I didn't recognize. Hotel near downtown. 280 downtown. A Tuesday night. When Charlotte had told me, she was staying at her sister's place, because of an early work event. Her sister lives 25 minutes from downtown Denver. There's no reason to get a hotel. I didn't say anything. I went back through 6 months of records. Found 4 more charges at the same property, spread across dates that looked almost random. A forensic accountant doesn't trust, almost. I pulled our shared phone plan records, mapped the timestamps against what Charlotte had told me she was doing on each of those dates. I sat with the data until it stopped looking coincidence and started looking like a pattern, which took about 45 minutes. By the time she came home that Sunday, I already knew. I waited 2 more weeks, collected everything. Printed statements, phone records, a chain of texts I'd found when she left her phone charging and walked out of the room. Careless in a way she'd never been before, which told me she'd gotten comfortable. I set 3 copies of everything, organized by date, sealed in waterproof file folders in my desk. Then Charlotte told me she was pregnant. We'd been trying for a second child for 14 months. Nothing had happened. I'd been tested, everything fine on my end. Doctors said sometimes it just takes longer. I'd believed that. I'd been patient. I looked at her across the kitchen counter. Henry was running a toy train along the edge of the table behind her, making engine sounds under his breath. How far along? I said. 8 weeks. 8 weeks was February. February was the hotel charges. Okay, I said. We should get the prenatal appointments on the calendar. She exhaled. She thought I didn't know. I called an attorney the next morning while Henry was at preschool. Diane Forsyth. 22 years of family law in Colorado, had handled 14 adultery-related custody cases in the past 3 years based on her published case history. She answered on the second ring. I need to know how emergency temporary custody works in Colorado, I said. And I need to establish paternity on a child that hasn't been born yet. Brief silence. How old is your current child? 5. Do you have documentation of the circumstances? I have binders. She told me to come in Thursday. I came in Thursday. I brought everything. She spread it across her conference table and was quiet for 3 full minutes. Then she said, "You've done half my job already." I told her that was sort of my professional reflex. We spent 2 hours going through options. In Colorado, documented adultery affects custody determinations, specifically the court's assessment of parental judgment and household stability. The fact that the affair involved someone with regular access to our home and our son Was in Forsyth's words significant? She said egregious, twice. I appreciated her specificity. I asked how fast she could move. Petition filed this week. Temporary custody hearing within 10 days. If the documentation holds, and it will, you get primary physical custody pending full proceedings. The house. Whose name is on the mortgage? Both. I've been making sole payments since she went part-time, after our son was born. I have 4 years of bank records. She smiled. Of course you do. I paid the retainer, $4,500, and drove to preschool 40 minutes early. Henry and I went to the Lego store, and he built a fire station at the in-store table. For an hour and a half, while I sat across from him, and tried to exist somewhere outside the cold operational clarity I'd been running on all week. He narrated the whole build. He asked me what a hook and ladder truck actually does. I explained it. He told me I was smart. I told him he was smarter. The intervention happened before I could file. Charlotte had told Max. Max had told Todd, who organized our friend group, 8 couples, 12 years of ski trips and cookouts and holiday parties. Todd called on a Thursday and said there was a dinner on Saturday. Just the group, nothing formal. I went, I knew exactly what it was. Private room at a restaurant we'd been to 100 times. 12 people around a long table, Charlotte at the far end. Max 3 chairs away from me, studying the tablecloth. I'd already paid Forsyth and had a strategy document on my desk at home. Nobody in that room knew that. Todd had clearly rehearsed. He said they'd all talked it through, said Max. And Charlotte had made a terrible mistake, but this was a 12-year friendship and a marriage. And Henry needed his family intact. Said, I was the most level-headed person any of them knew. Which meant the responsibility of stepping back fell to me. Said the group needed me to be the bigger person here. I let him finish. I looked around the table. Charlotte was crying the kind of tears you produce when the performance has to be convincing. Max was somewhere else entirely. The rest of them looked like people who had agreed to something at someone else's house, and were now less sure about it in the actual room. I said, I hear you. I picked up my glass, finished my water, set it down without sound. Thank you all for being here. I stood up, said goodnight to the restaurant staff on my way out, and drove home. Paid the babysitter. Checked on Henry, asleep with the trains lined up on his nightstand. Smallest to biggest, exactly right. I stood in the doorway for a minute just looking at him. Then I went downstairs and worked until 2 a.m. Forsyth filed everything by Friday morning. Divorce petition, temporary custody motion, the full documentation package. Adultery cited with complete specificity, including the name of the other party, his relationship to our household, his role as godfather to our son, and his presumed paternity of Charlotte's unborn child. Charlotte was served Friday afternoon. I'd taken Henry to a friend's place. When I came back, she was in the living room, with the papers on the coffee table, and her hands not quite steady. You already filed, she said. The retainer was paid the morning after you told me about the pregnancy. You've been planning this the whole time. Her voice had a particular quality to it. Not grief, not remorse. Shock at being outmaneuvered by someone she'd assumed would take months to get to this point. I found the hotel charge in February, the same week it happened, I said. I've been working since then. She flinched. Good. I need you to make arrangements by Sunday, I said. Henry stays here in his school in his routine. The temporary order is signed. The paperwork has everything about next steps. She cried, genuinely this time I think. Said she was sorry. Said it didn't mean anything. Said she'd do anything. Therapy, no contact with Max, whatever I needed to hear. The paperwork has everything, I said again, and went upstairs. She was gone by Sunday morning. The first week alone was logistically harder than I'd mapped out. 2-parent households run on invisible redundancy you don't notice until it's gone. I sent Henry to preschool with the wrong snack on Wednesday. Forgot picture day until another parent texted a reminder. Burned dinner twice. Which is embarrassing for someone who considers himself a careful person. Henry didn't seem to notice. Or he noticed and decided not to say anything about it. Which at 5 would mean he was handling this better than I was. His question on day 4 came at the kitchen table while he was eating cereal. Is Mom coming home tonight? I sat down next to him. Mom is staying somewhere else for a while. But she's okay, you're going to see her. And I'm here every single night. He ate a spoonful. Can Biscuit sleep in my room? Yeah. Biscuit can sleep in your room. He nodded like we'd resolved something. Went back to his cereal. That was the conversation. Kieran reached out in the second week. He'd been loosely part of the group since grad school, lived in Boulder, showed up to maybe half the events over the years. His text said, heard what happened. I'm not here to tell you anything. Just wanted to say I'm sorry, and I'm around if you need to talk. I called him that evening. We talked for an hour. He didn't ask about Max or Charlotte. Just asked about Henry, about work, about whether I was sleeping. When I hung up, I thought about how 12 years of group dinners had produced one person who got it right. And he was the one who'd always been on the edge of the frame. Everyone else went to voicemail. Max got blocked the same day I got home from the dinner. Todd and his wife 3 weeks later. Charlotte's calls went to Forsyth's office. Work filled the rest. I picked up a new audit, a regional contractor suspected of invoice fraud, which had a certain satisfying irony, and worked evenings after Henry was asleep. By end of the second month, I'd traced $2.3 million in ghost vendor payments, and logged 40 hours of overtime. My supervisor called it the cleanest fraud reconstruction she'd seen in years. I thanked her and asked about the senior director position that had been posted internally. She said she'd been waiting for me to ask. The custody hearing was in April. Forsyth called it procedurally clean. Charlotte's attorney tried to characterize my immediate filing as hostile and premeditated. Forsyth submitted Henry's school attendance records, his pediatric health reports, statements from his preschool teacher and director. All consistent, all dated from the period following Charlotte's departure. Primary physical custody granted. Standard supervised visitation for Charlotte. Pending the paternity determination and the finalization of divorce. Charlotte never contested it. I bought out her equity in the house. In June, $71,000. She took it and moved into an apartment in Aurora. Max moved in with her about 2 months later. Henry mentioned mommy's friend at pickup, and I noted it, relayed it to Forsyth, and otherwise let it sit in the category of things that were no longer my problem. The divorce was final in September. I kept the house. Primary custody. No alimony. Colorado weighs the circumstances of dissolution when there's documented cause. Forsyth sent a brief email, clean result, call if anything comes up. I paid the final invoice, closed the file and made dinner. Henry started kindergarten in August, and immediately formed an alliance with a kid named Emmett, who was also obsessed with trains. They sat together every day at lunch. Henry called him M within the first week, and Emmett apparently called Henry H. And I found out about all of this in small installments at pickup, delivered with the kind of gravity 5-year-olds reserve for things that actually matter. I started running again in September. 3 miles in the morning before Henry woke up the neighborhood loop I'd abandoned. Somewhere in the years when the marriage was comfortable and the schedule was full. I slept better than I had in years. Which is its own kind of data point. The swing set went up in October. I'd been promising Henry since August, kept getting pushed by work and proceedings, and the baseline exhaustion of doing everything alone. One Saturday morning we drove to Home Depot, loaded the kit into the truck bed, and I spent the better part of 7 hours on my back porch, reading assembly instructions while Henry handed me bolts and called out step numbers like a co-pilot. Dad, are you sure that piece goes there? Pretty sure. Sen. What if it falls down? I find mistakes in complicated systems for a living, I said. The swing set isn't going to fall. It didn't fall. He was on it until I physically made him come inside for dinner. And then first thing the next morning. And every afternoon for the following month in a row. Henry's teacher pulled me aside at a November school event. Said she wanted me to know that he was one of the most grounded kids in her class. Good with transitions. Kind to other students, asked questions that showed he'd actually been thinking. She said it with a particular warmth. Teachers save for when they actually mean it, and aren't filling time. I sat with that for a long time on the drive home. Somewhere in Aurora, Charlotte and Max were navigating whatever their version of things looked like with a newborn. Henry had mentioned the baby from a visit. A girl, apparently. I registered it the way you register weather in a county you're not driving through. It existed. It wasn't my calendar. The blocked number log on my old phone read, 97 attempts, when I finally let the contract lapse in December. I only looked because I was closing the account and the number was right there. 97. I'd answered 0. Henry's 6th birthday was in December. Bounce house in the backyard despite the cold. 7 kids from his class plus Emmett. Chili on the stove. Because it was the one thing I could cook reliably without consulting anything. The kids didn't care about the cold. They cared about the bounce house. At some point in the afternoon, I sat on the back steps with a cup of coffee and watched Henry and Emmett chase each other across the yard, in the particular way of kids who have decided they are best friends and are now simply enacting it. I thought about what his kindergarten teacher had said. I thought about the trains lined up on his nightstand every morning without fail. I thought about Todd's dinner table, 12 people, and the word bigger. They needed me to hold it together so they didn't have to sit with what they'd done. The friend group, Charlotte, Max, all of them needed me to absorb it quietly so the cost stayed invisible. The bigger man, the level-headed one, the reliable one who'd been reliable so long, they'd forgotten. It was a choice I made every single day, and not just a fixed feature of who I was. I didn't hold it together for them. I built something different instead. Henry came running over, face flushed, asking if I'd seen him almost catch Emmett. I said I'd seen the whole thing. He looked satisfied and ran back. He's going to find out more about his mother when he's older. That's going to be his question to ask, his decision to make, and I'll handle it honestly when it comes. But that's a different day. Today was a bounce house in Chile, and a kid covered in frost, who came over to check that I was watching. I was watching. I'm always watching. That's the whole thing, really. You don't need permission to step out of a situation that's treating you like furniture. You don't need the group's blessing, or a dramatic exit, or anyone to acknowledge what you lost. You just have to be willing to close the file, open a new one, and do the work. The swing set is still standing.